Okay, good. So we'll maybe mute so that Steve
Yep.
can.
Okay then.
And yeah, we'll wait and see. Okay, Steve, I think we're going to hand over to you. Can't wait to hear about the riddle of reincarnation. It's going to be
Okay
fantastic.
then.
Lovely. Fire away.
All right.
I'm going to
Are you going to
do your
say
screen.
screen sharing again? I think we have to put that back on.
I think it's still on, but it should be right. Mhm.
Oh, it is.
Good.
Oh, there we are.
Lovely.
Okay. Haha, how about that?
Perfect. The riddle of
The only
reincarnation.
thing is, right, okay. I think we're away. I'll kick off. Right. So I called it the riddle of reincarnation. It's a riddle to me in many ways. I hope that will become evident as we go on. It's a vast subject and one which I've been interested in for the whole of my life. And it's quite a controversial subject as well. So I think it's very important because what you believe vis-a-vis reincarnation, it affects the whole of your outlook on life. It really does. Okay. Um, how did I come to it? Well, I had quite a strong scientific bent when I was very young, and so I was interested in sciences and astronomy. I grew up I was in my teens in the 60s. So that was when like the space program was really getting going. So I naturally developed an interest in space travel. Uh, then somebody gave me a book on UFOs, which they didn't want, and that set me off on a whole new track as well. Um, it was really reading extensively about the UFO phenomenon that got me into contact with some more like esoteric and new agey reading. And it was really that led me towards, first of all, like theosophical teachings. And that was where the idea of reincarnation gradually dawned on me. Um, The theosophical books deal in great detail with the constitution of the human being and his higher members, like etheric body, astral body, and many others. Um, they also deal with conditions after death, and they also talk about reincarnation. Um, when I met this idea, my reaction to it was that it was a completely natural, normal idea, even rather self-evident to me. So I didn't react to it as something that needed a lot of argument and proof. I just accepted it pretty much as it was. It wasn't until I was 21 that I found my first book by Rudolf Steiner in the local library. It was just on, I'd seen it, I'd seen this book. It's just called simply Theosophy. And I'd seen it multiple times. And for some strange reason, I didn't have any inclination to take it out and have a look. So, however, in my last year at college, I did take it out during the Christmas vacation, took it home and kind of devoured it. This was at a time when I should have been reading my physics books in preparation for finals, but there we are. Yes, I recognized in Rudolf Steiner somebody who had a Western approach to these things. He was deeply connected with all of Western culture, particularly the German philosophic tradition. And he was able, obviously, to talk out of first-hand experiences of these things. So I recognized him as a master of what he was portraying. Uh, yeah, Why do I talk a bit as a riddle? Well, it was to me because as well as having a scientific inclination and a inclination towards spiritual things, I also had a leaning towards Church of England. And I felt that there was I needed to get to grips with Christianity. However, whenever I would have an in-depth conversation with Anglicans or people who are in the church, I always came up against this barrier. Whenever I talk about reincarnation, it was either met with blank astonishment or with complete rejection. And that caused me some quite a lot of distress, not just once, but I've met that repeatedly. Okay, so it's that's about my introduction to that. Let's talk a bit more about reincarnation in various cultures. Sure, you all know that reincarnation is the idea that the human individuality or one's higher self embodies itself repeatedly in successive physical bodies. In some cultures, as we'll see, you meet this in the slightly extended idea of transmigration, which means that after leaving your body, you don't necessarily come back as a human being, but you come back into other animal forms, animals or even insects. That's a different form of the belief. I think many people would think that when you have like a child prodigy or genius, somebody who at the age of 3 can be presented with a keyboard and start playing the piano like they're an absolute genius, that is very difficult to explain. I give the example of Mozart and Handel, who with whom that happened, and I never could buy that gifts like that either came through heredity or through the environment. It must be that the soul has brought something from a previous existence. I mention here, say, Mozart and Allegri's Miserere. It's this story which seemed to be quite well founded, that Mozart, being a child prodigy, was taken around Europe by his father, who was also an accomplished musician. Hello, Linda, coming in. And in being taken around Europe, they visited the Vatican, where they heard this piece of music, Allegri's Miserere, which was composed in the 17th century, and the Vatican had kept it to themselves. It didn't allow it to be published. And they wanted to keep it so that it could only be performed in the Vatican. So anyway, Mozart heard it. He then went home and wrote the whole thing out from beginning to end in complete detail. Right? Astonishing. This so astounded the Pope that he eventually allowed the piece of music to be published. But that's an astonishing gift. Mozart seemed to have this ability to see have an overall view of everything in complete detail. Right. Most of our awareness of reincarnation comes from the Hindu culture, which has always taught reincarnation. If you live a good life, then you can be reborn in a better life the next time round, or in Indian society, in a higher caste. Hindu teachings did become more widely known in the 50s and 60s. I'm mentioning the Hare Krishna movement. Now, the leader of that movement wrote extensively about Hindu doctrine and reincarnation, but he did so out of classical Indian scriptures. And his teachings allow for absolutely no interval between one life and the next. And he also accepts that at death, the soul passes immediately into a new body, which is suitable for one's state. So in that idea, if you've been a glutton all of your life, then at death you might pass into the body of a pig or something like that, where you can gorge yourself to your heart's content. Later on, of course, in India, we have the rise of Buddhism in the 6th century BC, based on the teachings of the Gautama Buddha. Buddhism teaches reincarnation, but in quite a subtle way. The teachings of the Buddha, in a nutshell, is that all life is suffering. The cause of suffering is desire. And unless you can obtain enlightenment, then you are trapped in this endless cycle of rebirth. It's quite a grim picture. You just have to keep returning to physical life to expiate your karma. Reincarnation is not accepted by Judaism or Islam, and Baha'ism, which arose in the late 19th century, I think from an Islamic cultural setting, that also does not accept reincarnation. Just touch on the situation in China. Religious belief in ancient China was largely based on ancestor worship. And as far as I can gather, teachings of reincarnation were first brought in to China fairly late by Buddhist missionaries in the 1st century. So reincarnation is now accepted in China, but these teachings mixed with the existing beliefs to form quite a complex mixture of beliefs. So reincarnation is accepted as a reality, but as something that's rather a grim reality to be feared. Okay, going back to the Middle East, then after the rise of Christianity, I think in the early centuries, like the 1st to the 3rd centuries, there was a quite an open culture where the early church fathers and writers and philosophers could freely discuss theological issues. So in that, you have some of the early church fathers referring to reincarnation. Some of them we think believed it. I give as an example Origen of Alexandria. Academics discuss whether he really believed in reincarnation or not, but he was a prodigious writer, and his writings certainly touch on it. Now, in the early 4th century, the Emperor Constantine made Christianity the state religion of the Roman Empire. So the inevitable happened that the church gradually became organized and institutionalized, and then great councils were called in various centuries to determine doctrine and what it was right to believe. So if you didn't fall into the official category, then you could be condemned as a heretic. So as far as I can tell, the idea of reincarnation was suppressed about the 6th century and did not figure in succeeding centuries. In the time of Justinian, the teachings of Origen were declared heretic as well, and a lot of his writings were destroyed. just interesting to note that at this time, Justinian shut down the ancient Greek schools of philosophy, and a lot of the scholars just dispersed throughout the whole of the Middle East. Right, so from then on, in all the ensuing centuries, basically reincarnation doesn't figure in Western society. That's a long time. It's about 15 centuries almost. So we're now at the time where the Orthodox churches still do not accept reincarnation. Neither do they accept the pre-existence of the soul. They assume that when a baby is born, a new soul is created as a new creation. If you do accept that the soul exists before birth in whatever state, of course, you open the way to a belief in reincarnation, because if a soul exists and can enter a body, live a life, and then die and pass on, obviously, if that can happen once, it can happen many times. So yes, Christians usually shun the idea if they're part of an exoteric church. But there are one or two interesting hints in the Bible. Sure, you're probably familiar with these. The case of Elijah and John the Baptist. A couple of quotes here. First quote is from the Gospel of John. The Jews sent priests and Levites out to ask John the Baptist, "Who art thou?" He confessed and said, "I am not the Christ." They then ask him further, "What then? Art thou Elias?" That's Elijah. And he says, "No, I am not. Art thou that prophet?" And he says, "No." Well, if you reject reincarnation, you might say at that point, well, right, there you are then. Cut and open and shut case. However, Jesus says in the Gospels, this is from Matthew chapter 17, his disciples come and ask him about Elijah. Jesus said, well, yes, Elijah does have to come first, but he actually has done so. And his disciples understood that he spoke about John the Baptist. So there you are. You have Jesus himself implying that Elijah is John the Baptist is the returned Elijah. I just might mention that in esoteric law, if you're an initiate, you'd never confess publicly and come out and say, I was reborn, I was so-and-so in a past life. That's simply not done. Right, so we got that. Also in the Bible, Jesus, again from John, Jesus passed by, he saw a man blind from his birth. His disciples asked him, saying, who did sin, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Well, what do you make of that? Well, at the very, very least, it shows that people in Palestine at that time did believe that a person could be reborn and carry with him the results of a previous existence. In this case, Jesus said that, well, neither this man sinned nor his parents, because he's saying that in this particular case, he is blind because of a completely different reason. But neither does he round on his disciples and say, what do you mean, did he sin before his birth? That's completely ridiculous. He doesn't say that. Well, coming forward through all the centuries in which reincarnation was forgotten in Western culture, come to the 19th century, and you have the resurgence in, well, the occult, in spiritualism, and in Eastern philosophies. various academics start taking a real interest in Eastern philosophies and religions, and a lot of it becomes more widely known in the West. Spiritualism started in I think the late 1840s. It actually started in America, and it spread very rapidly. Its teachings and its phenomena claiming to be communications from departed human souls. Did they accept reincarnation? Well, interestingly enough, in the early days of spiritualism, there was a French spiritualist who did accept and teach reincarnation, Allan Kardec and his movement. He's been virtually forgotten now, and his version, which he called Spiritism, was driven underground and is largely forgotten these days. Later on, spiritualist movements have largely tended to be negative towards reincarnation. Colin Wilson wrote prolifically on all kinds of things to do with the occult and the spiritual. In his book Afterlife, he says something quite interesting. He says he asked a spiritualist friend if, when he went to a seance, he could actually, ask them straight out about reincarnation. Is it true or is it not? And his friend apparently did this, and he comes back later and said, well, the answer is neither yes nor no. So there's no particular clarity there. Spiritualists tend not to regard it as a general rule. Okay, just going to quickly run through some figures. Well, although reincarnation is not accepted by our culture or by our churches, there are many interesting figures who have apparently accepted reincarnation and have either said so privately or have hinted so in their writings. Expect you all know Benjamin Franklin's epitaph here, which I think was never actually used on his gravestone, but he wrote it fairly early in life. It's quite a exquisite little witticism there. I think he did actually believe it. And I also think Benjamin Franklin was quite a high initiate, and that his activities and writings are crucial in determining what the American character later became, following on from the War of Independence. Right. If you want to know more about figures who have written about or hinted at reincarnation, the compendium is Sylvia Cranston's book called Reincarnation, the Phoenix Fire Mystery. There's a tremendous amount in it. I mentioned some of the names that are dealt with here. Henry Ford, Gustav Mahler, I'll give little quotes from on the next slide. Want a really interesting read? Carl Gustav Jung, his partial autobiography, Memories, Dreams and Reflections, is the most interesting read. I'm going to reread it myself this summer. There are some academics who have researched supposed cases of reincarnation. I mentioned this book by an American academic. He was at the University of Virginia Medical School, and he wrote this book, 20 Cases Suggestive of Reincarnation. So that's an attempt to take it seriously academically. Let's say the majority of his cases come from the East, where you have young children with vivid memories of a previous life, usually a very, very recent life, such that they're able to be taken to the place where they said they were born and give a lot of detail about it. Let's say this kind of memory usually disappears as the child gets older. Right. Here's some like quotes from that Sylvia Cranston's book. One from Henry Ford, one from Gustav Mahler, which interests me as an admirer of Mahler's music. Henry Ford, genius is experience. Some seem to think it is just a gift or talent, but it is the fruit of long experience in many lives. Okay. There are some intimations in poetry as well. I haven't got them all, but there's famous one from William Wordsworth, not actually explicitly about reincarnation, but it's a strong idea that we come with us bearing memories in early life of states from pre-existence. Also, Thomas Traherne, the mystical poet, gives similar intimations in his poetry. Of course, if you ask an academic, they'll probably poo-poo the idea that Wordsworth actually really believed in reincarnation. Well, we'll have to make up our own minds on that. All right, let's just see where I've got to. Okay, before I go on, I think I'll just have a quick pause. And anybody want to say anything, make any comments? Couple of minutes. Can anybody hear? All right. Okay.
Yeah, that's great, Steve. Do you want to say a bit more about Benjamin Franklin? You said that he's an initiate. I mean, I know that he was a Freemason at a high level.
Right. Yes.
He was connected with lodges in Paris and London and all over the place. But you may have much more detail than I have.
Well, this is something I've come to myself. I mean, I've read Franklin's autobiography and some of his works, and it's clear that he had deeper knowledge of many things, and just his ability and his cleverness are remarkable. I said that he had a role in forming the American character because as a printer, he wrote this annual almanac called Paul Williams, or is it Paul Williams, is it Paul Richards Almanac, which appeared, and it contained lots of like aphorisms from Franklin. And a lot of these aphorisms are about the values of hard work, being smarter than, far smarter than your business colleagues, outwitting your business rivals, and so on. And I thought, yeah, that is formative for the American character. And his writings via his almanac must have had a tremendously wide circulation, and they were very popular.
He certainly outsmarted the king, isn't he? And the
yes,
Parliament.
Yeah. And of course, I think he's like the four key documents to do with American independence, like the Declaration of Independence and the other key documents. I think he's the only figure who actually signed them all. He was right there at the beginning, right there in the action.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah, they'll be interesting to study his works in much more detail. But that's my take on it.
Yeah, no, he's a fascinating guy, and it's good that you've raised him as a figure because he did believe all this.
And as a scientist, he made real discoveries. He was very proud of his theory of electricity. I think he is the first person to say that electricity exists in opposite positive and negative forms.
Yeah.
And you can tell writing about it how proud he is that, my theory is correct.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
in fact, he's turned out to be right.
Yeah, he was years ahead of his time, and I think I read something that he could draw electricity out of the air as well, a bit like
Yes,
Tesla.
yes, he
Oh,
obviously had this intimate relationship to the electrical realm. Of course, is known as the inventor of the lightning conductor. Yeah. So yes, fascinating. Okay, shall I continue?
Yeah.
Right. When I tried this morning, I found that I ran over time. So the next section, I think I'm going to touch on fairly lightly. So we talked about figures who may have accepted reincarnation or explicitly believed it. But there are some famous cases which came to public note, right? First, I'm going to mention is, I think reincarnation came to public attention in America in the 1950s by means of a very famous best-selling book, The Search for Bridey Murphy. Basically, this was a Colorado woman who was hypnotically regressed, and she was regressed to her childhood, and then the regressor tried to take her back even further beyond her current birth. And she came out with these detailed memories of a life lived in Ireland in the early 19th century. This book became a blockbuster bestseller and was widely discussed in the press. Of course, it is extremely controversial. Articles were produced for and against it, and so it all went on. This life in the 19th century, many details, names of places were produced. Of course, these were investigated. Some of them were found to be plausible. Some of them couldn't be pinned down, of course. A notable paper, I think it was the Chicago American, tried to knock it all down with an expose and said that these were memories that this young woman had been told about when she was very, very young, and that she'd forgotten them. But then they re-emerge under hypnotic regression, and with the aid of the person's vivid imagination, give rise to this supposed life. Well, I don't think we can get to the bottom of it, but I just put it forward as something which became very well known. Another one, I think this is much less well known. This lady called Dorothy Eady, who became known as the Egyptian Seti. When she was very young, she produced detailed memories of supposedly a life in very ancient Egypt, pre-Christian life in Egypt. And she was so obsessed with Egypt that she actually became an Egyptologist. She moved to Egypt and married an Egyptian. But she took the name Seti. She had these memories of being a priestess in the temple of Seti at Abydos, and she actually ended up moving there and worked in Egyptology for the rest of her life. As I said in the note, she was respected for what she achieved in Egyptology by serious researchers, even if she was not believed as to her story. All right. I move on to another one. Book appeared in the 1970s called Second Time Around by Edward Ryle. This was a man who claimed to have vivid memories of a life in Somerset in the 17th century. He claimed to be John Fletcher, a farmer who became involved in the Great Monmouth West Country Rebellion of 1685. And he actually tells the story in detail. And he actually died in that rebellion. So he had these memories from an early year, and he basically kept quiet about it. It wasn't until there was an announcement in the Daily Express asking if people had any memories like this that he decided to tell his story. This American academic, Dr. Stevenson, actually researched the case and went to visit him and took it quite seriously and encouraged him to write the book. Once again, many of the details checked out, but in the end, some didn't. The baptismal records for these churches in the West Country still exist. The existence of John Fletcher and his family couldn't in the end be confirmed. So there we are. The reason I mention these cases were just to show that there are people who have these unusual memories, but I think they will never be proved well enough to be accepted by society in general or by academics. I mentioned these last two cases, Omseti and Edward Ryle, because these are cases where these memories were very strong and existed throughout the person's life. In fact, in both cases, they became stronger and more detailed. So one more case I want to mention, which I think is the most impressive. And this is something which I think was well known in the 70s and 80s, but may not be so well known now. And that's the case of Dr. Arthur Guirdham, who was a medical doctor and a psychiatrist. He was based in the West Country when he was practicing in Bath. So it's quite topical for me. So he attended Oxford and qualified as a medical doctor. He was quite a quiet, scholarly man, but throughout his upbringing, he had this strong link to this sect called the Cathars. And he also had a strong attraction towards the landscape in southern France. Anyway, he wrote quite a lot about disease and healing. Now, I'm sure most of you know who the Cathars were, but just as a quick note, they were a heretical sect who lived in the south of France, in the Languedoc, in the 12th and the 13th centuries. They called themselves Christians, but they had some beliefs which went way beyond Orthodox Christianity of the time. They had their own priesthood and they believed in reincarnation. So needless to say, they were persecuted by the Catholic Church of the time. And it's one of the several most horrific stories of the Middle Ages. They were persecuted and finally massacred. The last chapter of it took place when the remaining Cathars were besieged at Montségur. And finally, they capitulated, and more than 200 of the remaining Cathars were finally burnt at the stake. And that was pretty much the end of Catharism at the time. Anyway, because many of the Cathars at the time were interrogated by the Inquisition, many detailed records of those times actually exist and still remain in France. Anyway, going back to Arthur Guirdham, in his practice in Bath, he had a client, calls her Mrs. Smith. Obviously, that's not her real name, who was having very disturbing dreams. She'd wake up many nights, like thinking that she was being attacked, and she was like screaming the whole street down. So she was sent for counseling with Dr. Guirdham. As soon as she met him, these dreams ceased and they started working together. Eventually, she revealed to him that she had memories, quite detailed memories, of life as a Cathar in the 13th century, and that she'd been making notes of these before she met him. As they worked together, Guirdham got drawn into this more and more, and he eventually accepted that he also had had a previous life as a Cathar, and that he was linked with this lady. Guirdham then became more interested in Catharism and started researching it. I think he went to the south of France several times. He also established some links with French professors who were experts in Catharism. And in this way, the whole story of this previous life began to take on meaning and detail. Many of the people and their relationships with each other could be traced by name and in detail. So eventually, Guirdham wrote this book, the first of several, called The Cathars and Reincarnation. Interestingly enough, several more people in the southwest of England also became part of this group, and it appeared that they too also were part of this group, which apparently lived in the 13th century. Colin Wilson, who I've mentioned, obviously became interested in this, and he became friends with Guirdham and writes very positively about him. He writes quite a lot in his book, Afterlife, and there's a whole section devoted to him in the book Strange Powers. When Wilson first became friends with Wilson, he said to him, well, I read your book, The Cathars, and it quickly became evident to me that if you'd written it in a more sensational way, you'd have had an absolute blockbuster here, rather like the Bridie Murphy book. Well, Guirdham's answer was, he said, that's precisely what I didn't want to do. I didn't want to make it sensational. And that was in keeping with his character. Yes, so Guirdham wrote several books during the 70s concerning this mystery. But I've only really read the first one, but I'm going to read the others this summer. I think The Foot in Both Worlds is more about Guirdham himself and his own current life story. And his book, The Great Heresy, is about his final take on the Cathars and their philosophy. Just to give one more detail about this, Mrs. Smith gave information. She said that the Cathar priesthood wore blue robes, for example. Now, at that time, academics believed from historical documents that the Cathar priests only wore black robes. But as more information has become available, it has in fact become known that the Cathar priests did actually wear blue robes or green robes, as well as black robes. So a lot of this detail has been vindicated. Right. So that's the end of that section. and I'm going to go on to Rudolf Steiner for the last section. Anybody want to say anything at this point before I go into the final furlong?
Yeah.
Just an observation on this idea of group reincarnations, and with the Arthur Guirdham and Mrs. Smith and the concentration of Cathar type people in the southwest.
Yes.
It reminded me of something I think Shakespeare kind of hinted it about in the 1600s, the Roman Empire reincarnated in London and the south of England.
Uh-huh.
It referred to Westminster as the seat of Mars, kind of, and it was around that time, the 1600s, where the idea of the British Empire started to formulate, and they started going out and conquering the world.
Yeah. Well, yes. According to esoteric teachings, I mean, not only individuals reincarnate, but cultures and nations also go through periods of incarnation and reincarnation. Indeed, according to Rudolf Steiner and the Theosophists, so does the Earth itself. The Earth itself, as a cosmic body, also had previous existences. Yeah.
Tell us more about that. Might be another talk.
Yes, a very long and detailed one. Yes. Yes, I just to add to the Arthur Guirdham thing, his first book was largely about Mrs. Smith and so on. And then when he made it known that there were others involved, I mean, skeptics immediately said, come on, that's preposterous, that there'd be more having exactly the same story. But no, I think, reincarnation goes together with karma and destiny. And it makes perfect sense that if you have something to do with somebody in a previous life, then you need to arrange to be reborn with them, so that you can rectify with them past experiences, if you like. It makes perfect sense that the people you were involved with before, you need to meet again, so that what happened in the past can be taken further. Right. Shall I continue? Because
yeah, unless anybody else wants to add to anything there.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, maybe more at the end then.
All right, yes. So I'll time at the end for questions. So I'll go on now. Right. Okay. So Rudolf Steiner. Of course, I've given previous talks about Rudolf Steiner's life and work in great detail. So, and just very brief synopsis here, just to help us. Rudolf Steiner began lecturing at the beginning of the 20th century. He was previously known as well-known writer and academic in Vienna and in Weimar. So his writings were quite well known. However, he was when he moved to Berlin at the beginning of the 20th century, he was invited to lecture within the Theosophical Society. And it's only now that he first starts telling what he knows in detail about esoteric matters. This created such a sensation that he quickly became a very popular lecturer within the Theosophical Society. He was trusted by Annie Besant, the effective leader of the society at the time, and was quickly made head of the German section of the Theosophical Society. And from then until his death, 25 years later, he lectured and he lectured and he lectured and he lectured. And there's a vast what they call Gesamtaufgabe, complete works of Rudolf Steiner, his basic books, and the record of his lectures. His basic books, of course, as I said, are tremendously hard-going. The lectures are a bit easier because, it's more of a conversational style where he's talking to his audience, and there's even the occasional funny anecdote in there as well, which is good. All right. I have to say that in all of Steiner's writings and teachings, reincarnation and karma are absolutely fundamental. Without that, everything would fall to the ground. Now, Steiner always insisted that he would talk out of his own spiritual research and experience. And Annie Besant trusted him to a degree that she allowed him to do that. Okay, so Rudolf Steiner was able to read into the Akashic record, something that's known about in esoteric circles, a fine spiritual essence on which everything that has ever happened on all planes is somehow recorded. This is known about in the Theosophical Society, but Steiner always is talking out of his own research. It's a picture of Steiner with Annie Besant in England in the early years. Now, Steiner always insisted upon a Western approach to these things, whereas the Theosophical Society at that time had attained a very Eastern flavor. So it was somehow inevitable that a few years later on, there was going to be a parting of the ways. Okay, just when I first started looking at these lectures on reincarnation, I quickly realized it's so vast, it's only going to be possible of me to give a few snippets about Steiner's approach to it. Okay. His powers enabled him to actually look at the past lives of individuals, and more than that, the past conditions of the earth itself. He always insisted that the results of clairvoyant research can be got directly from the spiritual world and don't require the support of any external documents or traditions. He was also most insistent that although this can only be done by people who have the requisite clairvoyant powers, that once these findings are made known, they can be assessed and understood by any reasonable thinking person, even if they're not clairvoyant. Once those things are made known, he also said it's often possible to find corroboration within documents or scriptures. And he actually gave several lectures on the Gospels himself. Steiner cautioned that past lives cannot be worked out by intellectual speculation. The results have to be taken from clairvoyant research. Any attempt to get at one's past lives, for example, by speculating about it, no matter how subtly, almost certain to be barking up the wrong tree. Here you see Steiner in his characteristic lecturing mode. Okay. Steiner had a follower called Dr. Riddle, who, before he came to anthroposophy, was quite a leading Protestant pastor in Germany, who was well trusted and had a large following. When he felt that he was obliged to look into theosophy, he decided he had to do it seriously. So he actually went to Steiner and asked him about it. So obviously, as a Protestant, he was puzzled by the idea of reincarnation. When he talked to Steiner about it, Steiner replied, "No," he said, "you're quite right. Reincarnation is not a doctrine of Christianity. It is a fact that is revealed in spiritual investigation. That must be accepted, for such is the case." There we are. I'll also say that Steiner was extremely responsible when speaking about reincarnation or past lives. He almost regarded it as a holy mystery, and he would never brazenly talk about who a person had been in a past life, certainly not in public. He might do so in very private circles to people who would be able to take it seriously. So he gave many lectures in the last year of his life called the karmic relationship lectures, where he uses the past lives of certain figures to illustrate how karma actually works. But he would never do so with the past life of a person who was still living, or even if there was some of his family who would be embarrassed by it. I say, this contrasts strongly in the situation which developed at that time in the Theosophical Society. I mentioned in my previous talk the whole story about Krishnamurti and his discovery by the Theosophists. Leadbeater, the Society's leading clairvoyant at the time, took it upon himself to investigate Krishnamurti's previous lives. Not content with that, he decided it was appropriate to publish them in a book, which then became public knowledge. And I think this gradually led to a culture within the Theosophical Society where people would gossip about who was who in the previous life, living people who were members of the society. And that was a pretty bad situation, and Steiner was appalled at it. Yeah, so I've mentioned about his lectures about karma. He actually gave some of these lectures shortly before he fell ill for the final time, and some of these lectures were in London and Torquay. All right. When I began to look at this, I really had a sense that Steiner's presentation of reincarnation is actually an advance on what went before. His picture of reincarnation is that we return to physical existence, well, partly as a result of our karma to work out what's gone on in previous lives. But he also sees that we come, the world itself is progressing, and human souls are continually progressing to new abilities and new experiences. So it's necessary for the individual to come back to physical life periodically in order for us to keep up with the development of humanity. And I think that makes perfect sense. We come back to physical existence when the world itself has changed enough for us to experience new things. According to Steiner, the cycle of rebirth is not endless, nor is it fatalistic or mechanical. It began at a certain point in the remote past, when the earth was very different, and one day it will end when the earth has become transformed to a new state. All right, according to Steiner's picture, abilities don't always remain the same, but they actually undergo a transformation from one life to another. So we mustn't always imagine, for example, if somebody is a musician, that he will therefore be a musician in every life. It may be possible because freedom is also a possibility for the soul to choose. But in general, a soul might become a great musician in one life and decide that it needs to round out another facet of its being in another life. So it doesn't follow that a great musician will always become a great musician, but he may become, for example, a mathematician in the next life. There's a connection there because what is music in the body? Actually, what does it become when it's transformed into the head? It becomes mathematics. There's a deep inner link here. If we've learned a language in one life, does it follow that we'll be able to speak that language in the next life? Well, not at all, because what you learnt as one language may well undergo a transformation into something else, into a different faculty. Many of us would have had lives in ancient Greece and Rome. Does it help us to learn Latin at school? Apparently not, no. Steiner did say, though, that as an example of transformation of faculties, somebody who can speak many languages in one lifetime, in the next lifetime, they may not have the capacity for speaking many languages, but that ability has been transformed into the power of making good judgments. There again, I think if you mull that over, you'll see that there's an actual, quite a deep connection between those. Right, so those are just some snippets of Steiner's teachings about reincarnation. And just to give you an idea of how he talks in his lectures there, I'm just going to give you an idea of this passage here, because this gives an idea of how reincarnation and karma actually works. He says, in earthly life, it's not pleasant to stand face to face with something and we admit that what we have done was foolish. We wish we had not made the foolish decision. But this is how it appears in one earthly life, because between the foolish act and its results, there's the same earthly life intervening. Between one earthly life and another, this is not the case. Suppose you look back to a former life on earth. You did something good or ill to another person. In the life between death and a new birth, you cannot help realizing that you have become imperfect by doing wrong to another human being. You must make good this maiming of your soul, and you resolve by your own will to achieve in a new earthly life what will make good the fault. So I think that gives a good hint on how and why reincarnation works. After we leave our body, we go into a state after death where the soul reviews its life on earth. And we see what we have done and how it affects other people. Steiner actually teaches that we see it not from our point of view, but from the other person's point of view. So if we said something to hurt somebody else, even if we did it unintentionally, or even if we are unaware that we've done it, after death, we experience what it was like for the other person to be hurt like that. our soul knows that that is something that it cannot tolerate. And so, therefore, we form our karma by resolving that we have to meet that person again. And this we lay into our soul as a kind of a seed, which becomes effective in our next life. So we have to meet that person again in order to counterbalance what you did. And as I say, Steiner's view of reincarnation is not fatalistic. There's not only bad karma, there's good karma as well. If we've done something good, then we'll have a chance to build on it in subsequent lives. Right, there's a bit more to that quote, but I think I'm running out of time. Just the last one here. If you experience joy through a human being in one earthly life, you may be sure that it is the outcome of the love you unfolded towards them in a previous life. The joy flows back again into your soul during your life on earth. So I think I'll leave it there and I'll give room for any comments. Of course, there's much, much more, but well, I could go on forever, but I mustn't. Right, there we are. I'll go back to Steiner lecturing, so leave that there. I just invite any comments.
Anybody want to ask anything or add anything?
You may possibly be disappointed that I didn't give any kind of explicit examples of previous lives of famous personalities, but I was more interested in trying to explain the importance of karma and reincarnation.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the figures that Steiner talks about their past lives, they're figures from German culture who may be not so well known in the English-speaking world. But some of them are.
Yeah. Well, I think those of us who know a lot about reincarnation and understand a bit, and even more now we've had your talk, know that this kind of, when you meet someone, you often have that feel that you've met them before. Or I think a lot of people here know about that. I don't know if anybody wants to share any things that they feel about that, but
we may well not have the images that come up or memories, but we'll have a certain feeling which we ought then to nurture. Yes.
Yeah, and it's not, I think, clear cut. It's if you did something bad, it's this, or if you did something good, it's that. It's, as you said, it something we have to understand.
Yeah, not everything is karma as well. Some things are the result of the past, but some things are new happenings which will be karma for successive lives in the future.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Anybody want to say anything about anything? Oh, hi, Karen. I didn't see you.
Yeah, I've unmuted myself.
Oh, hello, Karen. Right.
Hello, Steve.
Didn't realise you were there. Hello.
I snuck in, so apologies if I'm repeating something. Steve, are you aware? I mean, a soul that wanted, maybe a soul that's reincarnated, is that their free will, or has something happened karmically that they have no choice but to be reincarnated?
Well, I think spiritual teaching.
I'll say yes or no. I mean, I'm not going to. If it's too big a question, that's fine. It's just I was interested to think if Rudolf Steiner, knowing what he knew, what he was studying while he was here, maybe would he have elected to be reincarnated, and maybe he is somewhere in the world right now.
I think I know where he is.
Yes, yes. You mentioned, do we choose to come? Well, I think spiritual teachings say that yes, we do choose to be born. We do choose our lives. However, we choose it when we're in the higher worlds, and our judgment there may be very different from the judgment we would have while we're in earthly life.
Yeah.
One of the main objections to reincarnation is that people say, how can you say that I would have chosen a life like this? No, I would never would have. Who would say that you would choose to come back and be abused or something, or be a victim?
Or Steve, what about the idea of being reincarnated as a different beast and not a human?
As I mentioned, it's some Eastern teachings do still teach this. I don't think the human individuality goes back into the animal kingdoms. I don't think it can go backwards like that. I think it can only develop forwards. That's my take on it. And
Yeah,
I think, yeah. Although an initiate, they say, can choose to go into an animal body to gain information about what it's like, but that's different.
Yeah.
I once had a friend in my choir in Wimbledon. She'd had a bit of a rotten life and she wasn't enjoying it. And I talked to her about reincarnation, and she said, "Oh no, it's a terrible idea. You know what? I choose not to believe it. It's awful."
Yeah. It is quite hard if you're living a difficult, as you think, a difficult life, to think, why on earth would I choose this? Quite, isn't it?
Excuse me, I need to go, guys. All right, so it was great. So,
all right, thank you. Good to see you.
Okay, then,
yeah.
All right.
Yeah, it's such a big subject, as you say, and you've really got to put your mind in a completely different way, haven't you, to even...
Well done you, Steve. It's far too big for my little brain.
Sure,
we all start somewhere, and
But I think it's interesting when you said at the beginning that you knew from a very young age, Steve, that it made perfect sense to you, and why would anybody not, understand it?
Yeah, so that's why. I mean, I've been quite distressed, to see the reaction you get from church people, because many of them, there've been centuries and centuries where this idea is not featured in Western culture, and many Orthodox church people seem just to find the idea so utterly alien and even repulsive, and that's not my reaction to it at all. So that's a puzzle to me. I don't think, well, for me personally, my life is a riddle to me, the way it's worked out, that I couldn't possibly explain in terms of what I've inherited and what my environment has been. Just it's a riddle which can't be answered in those terms. So therefore, it's natural for me to it's a reality that it must come from further back.
I think that helps, Stephen, that if you've got an idea of why you incarnated, what your destiny is, then it's easier to accept the environment of the time and the social norms, and in this case, the sort of chaos and change that's going on all around us, and the polarization of ideas in society. So I think it's within a context, if you've got that kind of context where you've got an inkling of why you're here, what your destiny is, then you can make sense of it.
Well, they also say that we before birth, we prepare our incarnations, and that we've chosen freely to come.
Yeah.
Also, that on coming down to incarnation, that we kind of have a prevision of more or less how it's going to be, and that we have a choice whether to go ahead or to back out.
I think coming at it from an astrological point of view, you can see that in someone's charts, that certain things have been kind of preordained to be experienced. And then in between those occasions, there's kind of a free-for-all.
And because we're here, we must have said, yes, we accept it.
Yeah.
That's not easy to accept at all times. There are always times where you think, oh, had enough of this. So anyway, there we are. Such is life.
Fascinating.
And just to go back to Karen's question about the beast and your answer, which I think was, spot on, about there would be some high-level souls who would choose to incarnate as an animal just to expand their consciousness. So they have a greater understanding of life in its entirety on Earth and what it might be like. And all the rest of their life is just noise for that experience.
Okay. Does anybody else want to? Done quite well. It's been really interesting, Steve. As you say, you could find out more forever and ever. It's a never-ending study, isn't it, for you, particularly
Yes.
with the work and the books that you.
I've concentrated on Rudolf Steiner, of course, but there are other, I've taken an interest in it, and I've come across similar teachings through, White Eagle, Peter Dunov, and Michael Ivanov. Their teachings also are fully in line with all this. So, there we are.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you very much. It's been wonderful. And a few people who'd said they couldn't make it, I will send them the recording.
Yeah, that's fine. Good.
And I'll send it to you anyway. And anyone else who wants to have the recording to look at the slides again, just let me know and you can have it. Okay. Well, great to see you. And
right.
We'll see you all again at some point.
Good. All right. Thank you all for looking in. Good.
Thank you.
All right. Now I have to go now myself. Okay.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
All right.